The first sign that something was wrong came at dawn on a Tuesday morning in March. Colonel Amadou Sankara stood in the vault beneath the central bank of Burkina Faso, staring at empty shelves where gold bars worth $200 million had been stored just hours before. The silence in the underground chamber was deafening. Where stacks of gleaming ingots should have lined the reinforced steel shelving, only dust particles floated in the harsh fluorescent light. Sankara's hands trembled as he reached for his satellite phone, knowing that this call would change everything. "Sir, we have a problem," he whispered into the device. "The gold is gone. All of it." 300 miles away, in the presidential compound in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré was reviewing intelligence reports when the call came through. The young military leader, who had risen to power through a combination of strategic brilliance and calculated risk-taking, felt his blood run cold as Sankara's words reached him. "What do you mean gone?" Traoré's voice was barely controlled, each word measured and dangerous. "The vault was sealed when I arrived for the morning inspection. The electronic locks showed no breach. But inside, nothing. 200 million in gold reserves, vanished without a trace." Traoré closed his eyes, his mind racing through the implications. The gold reserves weren't just wealth, they were the foundation of his government's independence, the backing for every economic reform he had promised, the guarantee that had secured crucial military alliances across the Sahel region. "Seal the compound. No one enters or leaves. I'm coming personally." But that was only the beginning of a conspiracy that would shake the very foundations of West African politics. The drive to the central bank took Traoré through the heart of Ouagadougou, past the bustling markets where vendors sold everything from colorful fabrics to mobile phone credits. The people of Burkina Faso had placed their trust in him, believing his promises of economic sovereignty and freedom from foreign influence. Now, with the gold reserves gone, those promises hung by a thread. Traoré's convoy consisted of 3 armored vehicles, each carrying elite guards from his personal security detail. These were men who had stood with him during the darkest hours of his rise to power, soldiers whose loyalty had been tested in combat and proven unshakable. Or so he had believed. As they approached the bank, Captain Djibril Ouedraogo, head of Traoré's security, received an encrypted message on his secure device. His face remained impassive as he read it, but something in his posture shifted almost imperceptibly. The message was brief: Phase 2 initiated. Maintain position until signal. The bank's underground vault was a fortress within a fortress. Built with French engineering and German steel, it had been designed to withstand everything from earthquakes to direct military assault. The electronic security system was state-of-the-art, requiring 3 separate biometric scans and a time-locked mechanism that could only be opened by authorized personnel during specific windows. As Traoré descended into the vault, accompanied by Sankara and 2 technical experts, the magnitude of the theft became clear. This wasn't the work of common criminals or even sophisticated international thieves. The precision required, the intimate knowledge of security protocols, the ability to move $200 million in gold without leaving a trace, this was an inside operation of the highest order. "Show me the security footage," Traoré commanded. The technical expert, a nervous young man named Bourima, pulled up the surveillance system on his tablet. "Sir, that's part of the problem. The cameras show everything is normal until 11:47 p.m. last night. Then there's a gap of exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes. The system shows no malfunction, no power interruption, nothing." "A gap of 4 hours," Traoré repeated slowly. "Exactly how long would it take to move that much gold?" With proper equipment and enough men, yes sir. But they would have needed trucks, heavy lifting equipment, and perfect coordination with the security schedule. Traoré studied the empty vault, his analytical mind working through the possibilities. Someone with access to the highest levels of his government had orchestrated this theft. Someone who knew the bank's schedules, who could disable sophisticated security systems, who had the resources to move massive amounts of gold without detection. But no one expected what came next. As Traoré's team continued their investigation, 200 miles to the south, a convoy of unmarked trucks was crossing the border into Ghana. The vehicles moved under cover of darkness, their heavy cargo carefully secured and their route planned to avoid military checkpoints. At the head of the convoy, a man in civilian clothes monitored radio communications, ensuring that their passage remained undetected. The man's name was General Marcus Kabore, formerly Traoré's most trusted military advisor. 3 months earlier, he had been secretly approached by representatives of a mining consortium with deep ties to international financial networks. The offer had been simple: help facilitate the transfer of Burkina Faso's gold reserves, and receive enough compensation to live comfortably for the rest of his life. But Kabore's motivations went beyond mere greed. He had grown increasingly concerned about Traoré's independence from Western allies, his growing cooperation with Russian military advisors, and his public statements challenging the traditional economic relationships that had governed West Africa for decades. In Kabore's view, Traoré was leading the country toward isolation and potential conflict with powerful international interests. The gold theft was phase 1 of a larger operation designed to destabilize Traoré's government and create conditions for a more compliant leadership to take power. Phase 2 would involve creating a financial crisis that would force Traoré to seek emergency assistance from the International Monetary Fund, assistance that would come with conditions that effectively reversed his sovereignty agenda. As dawn broke over the Ghanaian border, Kabore's convoy reached a private airfield where a cargo plane waited. The aircraft belonged to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, but its real owners were part of a network that had been manipulating African mineral wealth for generations. Meanwhile, back in Ouagadougou, Traoré was beginning to piece together the scope of the conspiracy. His investigation had revealed something deeply troubling. The theft had been timed to coincide with scheduled meetings between his government and Russian officials regarding expanded military cooperation. The missing gold would make it impossible for Burkina Faso to fulfill its commitments under the emerging partnership agreements. "Sir," Captain Ouedraogo approached with apparent urgency, "we've received intelligence about possible foreign involvement in the theft. Our sources suggest that French intelligence may have been monitoring our gold reserves." Traoré looked at his security chief with growing suspicion. Ouedraogo had been the one to recommend the specific security protocols for the vault. He had also been present at every high-level meeting regarding the gold reserves. Most concerning of all, he had been the first to suggest that foreign powers might be involved, a deflection that now seemed calculated to misdirect the investigation. "What sources?" Traoré asked quietly. "Anonymous intelligence, but usually reliable. They suggest that Operation Sunrise, a classified French program, has been targeting African gold reserves to prevent Russian economic influence in the region." It was a plausible story, and under normal circumstances, Traoré might have accepted it without question. But something in Ouedraogo's manner, the way he avoided direct eye contact, the slight tension in his voice, triggered Traoré's survival instincts. "Captain, I want you to personally oversee the investigation of all bank personnel. Start with anyone who had access to the vault codes. Of course, sir. I'll begin immediately. But as Ouedraogo left the vault, Traoré made a decision that would save his government and expose a conspiracy reaching the highest levels of international finance. Instead of returning to the presidential compound as planned, Traoré ordered his driver to take him to a safe house known only to his most trusted aide, Lieutenant Colonel Fatoumata Traoré, no relation, but a brilliant intelligence officer who had served with distinction in counter-terrorism operations across the Sahel. The safe house was a modest building in a residential district, indistinguishable from the homes around it but equipped with advanced communication systems and secure meeting facilities. Fatoumata was waiting when Traoré arrived, her expression grave. "I've been monitoring communications traffic," she reported. "There's been unusual activity on several encrypted channels, including some that we've previously associated with General Kabore." Traoré felt the pieces beginning to fall into place. "What kind of activity?" "Coordination signals, sir. The pattern suggests a large-scale operation involving multiple assets. And there's something else. Satellite imagery shows unusual vehicle movement near the Ghanaian border around the time of the theft." Traoré studied the satellite photographs that Fatoumata spread across the table. The images clearly showed a convoy of heavy trucks moving southward along routes that avoided main highways and military checkpoints. The timing and direction left little doubt about their cargo. How long would it take to intercept them? If they're still moving at the same pace, our rapid response units could reach their probable location within 6 hours. But sir, if General Kabore is involved, we have to assume that other elements within our military structure may be compromised. The implications were staggering. If Kabore had turned, and if he had recruited others within the military command, then Traoré's government faced not just a financial crisis but a potential coup. The theft of the gold reserves could be the opening move in a broader operation designed to remove him from power. "Fatoumata, I need you to prepare a list of personnel whose loyalty is absolutely certain. We're going to need to move carefully." As they worked through the night, analyzing intelligence and planning their response, neither of them knew that Captain Ouedraogo was at that moment meeting with his foreign handlers in a secure location across the city. The meeting took place in the basement of an import-export business owned by a Lebanese merchant who had been facilitating covert operations in West Africa for more than a decade. Present were Ouedraogo, 2 men who claimed to be French cultural attachés but were clearly intelligence operatives, and a woman with an American accent who introduced herself only as Sandra. "The gold transfer was successful," Sandra reported. "Kabore's convoy reached the airfield on schedule, and the cargo is now en route to secure facilities in Europe. Phase 2 can begin immediately." One of the French operatives, a thin man with sharp features named Philippe, leaned forward. "What's Traoré's current status? Does he suspect internal involvement?" "He's suspicious," Ouedraogo admitted. "He's starting to ask questions about personnel with vault access. But I've managed to direct his attention toward foreign involvement, specifically French intelligence." Sandra smiled coldly. "Perfect. That plays directly into our narrative. We want him to believe that this is about great power competition, not internal betrayal. It will make him more likely to seek Russian assistance, which will justify the broader international response we have planned." Philippe nodded. "The economic pressure should begin within 48 hours. When Burkina Faso's financial obligations come due and they can't meet them because of the missing gold, the markets will react swiftly. Currency devaluation, capital flight, social unrest, all the conditions necessary for regime change." But they had underestimated Ibrahim Traoré's strategic brilliance and his network of loyalists who remained hidden even from his closest advisors. While Ouedraogo believed he was successfully manipulating his president, Traoré had already begun implementing a counter-operation that would expose the conspiracy and turn the tables on those who sought to destroy his government. The plan began with a simple but clever deception. Traoré allowed Ouedraogo to believe that he was following the narrative about French involvement while secretly deploying Fatoumata's intelligence network to track the real perpetrators. Using satellite surveillance, communication intercepts, and human intelligence assets across West Africa, they began mapping the full scope of the conspiracy. The breakthrough came when one of Fatoumata's agents in Ghana reported unusual activity at a remote airfield. Local witnesses had seen heavy trucks arriving in the middle of the night, followed by a large cargo aircraft that took off before dawn. The aircraft's tail number, when cross-referenced with international databases, revealed connections to a web of shell companies linked to major international mining interests. "They're not just stealing our gold," Traoré realized as he studied the intelligence reports. "They're positioning themselves to control our entire mining sector. This is economic colonialism disguised as theft." Fatoumata's investigation had uncovered something even more disturbing. The conspiracy involved not just the theft of existing gold reserves but a long-term plan to secure mining rights across Burkina Faso's most valuable deposits. International mining companies, working through local proxies and corrupt officials, intended to create a financial crisis that would force the government to sell mining concessions at dramatically reduced prices. "Sir, we've identified at least 12 government officials who appear to be involved," Fatoumata reported. "The network includes people in the mining ministry, the central bank, and unfortunately, several members of your personal security detail." The revelation that his own security apparatus had been compromised sent a chill through Traoré. He had always known that leadership required constant vigilance against external threats, but the idea that those closest to him could be working for foreign interests challenged his fundamental assumptions about loyalty and trust. But that was when Ibrahim Traoré made a decision that would not only save his government but establish him as one of Africa's most formidable political strategists. Instead of moving immediately against the conspirators, Traoré chose to let them continue their operation while secretly preparing a counter-strike that would expose the entire network to international scrutiny. Working with Fatoumata and a small circle of absolutely trusted officers, he began documenting every aspect of the conspiracy, building an airtight case that would implicate not just the local participants but their international sponsors. The key was timing. The conspirators expected Traoré to react predictably, to lash out, to make accusations without proof, to create the kind of political instability that would justify international intervention. Instead, he remained calm and methodical, gathering evidence while appearing to follow the false leads that Ouedraogo was providing. "Captain," Traoré said during one of their meetings, "I want you to coordinate with French authorities regarding their investigation into Operation Sunrise. If they're involved in monitoring our gold reserves, we need to understand the full scope of their intelligence activities." Ouedraogo agreed readily, believing that this would further entrench Traoré in a narrative that blamed foreign powers while ignoring internal betrayal. He immediately reported this development to his handlers, who saw it as confirmation that their psychological operation was succeeding. But Traoré's real purpose was different. By requesting cooperation with French authorities, he was creating a paper trail that would later demonstrate how Ouedraogo had been feeding information to foreign operatives while ostensibly protecting national security interests. 3 days after the gold theft, Traoré made his move. The operation began at dawn with simultaneous raids across Ouagadougou and 3 other cities. Teams of loyal military personnel, coordinated by Fatoumata and operating under sealed orders, arrested 12 government officials, 6 military officers, and 4 civilians connected to the conspiracy. The raids were conducted with surgical precision, ensuring that no evidence could be destroyed and no conspirators could escape. At the same time, Traoré personally confronted Captain Ouedraogo in the presidential compound, presenting him with recorded conversations, financial records, and photographic evidence of his meetings with foreign operatives. "Captain, you have served with distinction for many years," Traoré said, his voice calm but heavy with disappointment. "I want to give you one opportunity to explain why you chose to betray not just me, but the people of Burkina Faso." Ouedraogo's face went pale as he realized the extent of Traoré's knowledge. The evidence was overwhelming: recorded phone conversations, bank transfers, even surveillance photographs of his meetings with Sandra and Philippe. "Sir, you don't understand the broader context," Ouedraogo said desperately. "The path you're taking will lead to international isolation, economic collapse, and potential conflict with powers that could destroy this country. I was trying to prevent a greater catastrophe. By stealing our gold. By selling our sovereignty to foreign mining interests. By betraying the trust of everyone who believed in our independence." Traoré's words cut through Ouedraogo's justifications like a blade. The captain had convinced himself that he was acting as a patriot, but faced with the evidence of his actions, the moral bankruptcy of his position became undeniable. But the most dramatic revelation was still to come. As Traoré's security forces continued their investigation, they uncovered communications that revealed the true scope of the international conspiracy. The gold theft wasn't just about Burkina Faso. It was part of a broader operation targeting multiple African governments that had shown independence from traditional Western economic relationships. Similar operations were being planned or had already been executed in Mali, Niger, and the Central African Republic. The goal was to create a cascade of financial crises that would force these governments to abandon their sovereignty initiatives and return to more compliant relationships with international financial institutions. "They're not just targeting us," Fatoumata reported during an emergency security briefing. "This is a coordinated campaign to reverse the wave of African independence movements across the Sahel region." The intelligence was devastating in its implications. For generations, African governments had struggled with the legacy of colonial economic relationships that kept the continent's vast mineral wealth flowing to international markets while leaving local populations in poverty. Traoré and leaders like him represented a new generation of African politicians determined to change that dynamic. The response from international conspirators was sophisticated and ruthless. Rather than relying on traditional military intervention, they had developed economic warfare techniques that could destabilize governments from within while maintaining plausible deniability. But they had made one crucial miscalculation. They had underestimated Ibrahim Traoré's strategic intelligence and his ability to build networks of loyalty that transcended traditional institutional boundaries. As news of the arrest spread, Traoré faced his greatest test as a leader. The conspirators had succeeded in creating economic uncertainty. The missing gold reserves had indeed triggered concerns in international markets, and the value of Burkina Faso's currency had begun to decline. Social media was filled with rumors and speculation about the government's stability. Traoré's response was masterful in its combination of transparency and strategic communication. Rather than hiding the theft or minimizing its significance, he called a press conference and laid out the full scope of the conspiracy for the people of Burkina Faso and the international community. Using carefully prepared evidence, he demonstrated how foreign interests had worked with local collaborators to steal the nation's gold reserves as part of a broader campaign to undermine African sovereignty. "This is not just about missing gold," Traoré declared, standing before assembled journalists and diplomats. "This is about the fundamental question of whether African nations have the right to control their own resources and determine their own economic relationships." The press conference was broadcast live across West Africa and streamed internationally. Traoré's calm, methodical presentation of evidence, bank records, recorded conversations, satellite imagery, and documentary proof of the international conspiracy, created a media sensation. Within hours, the story was being covered by major news outlets around the world. The revelation that international mining interests had orchestrated the theft of a sovereign nation's gold reserves to create conditions for economic manipulation sparked outrage across Africa and condemnation from unexpected quarters of the international community. But that was only the beginning of Traoré's counter-offensive. Working with intelligence services in Ghana, Algeria, and surprisingly, Russia, Traoré's government was able to track the stolen gold to storage facilities in Europe. The international attention generated by his press conference had made it impossible for the conspirators to quietly dispose of their stolen assets. Within a week, European authorities, under intense diplomatic pressure, had frozen accounts and seized assets connected to the shell companies involved in the theft. More importantly, they had begun investigating the international mining consortium that had financed the operation. The recovery of the gold was dramatic and symbolic. When the first shipment of recovered gold bars arrived back in Ouagadougou, thousands of people lined the streets to witness its return to the central bank. For many Burkinabe citizens, the successful recovery represented more than just retrieved wealth. It was proof that their government could defend their interests against powerful international forces. But the most significant long-term impact came from Traoré's handling of the captured conspirators. Rather than simply prosecuting them under domestic law, Traoré's government worked with international legal experts to bring charges under international statutes governing economic crimes and violations of sovereign rights. The trials, conducted with full transparency and international observation, became a showcase for African legal capabilities and a warning to others who might consider similar operations. General Kaboré, who had been arrested in Ghana and extradited back to Burkina Faso, faced charges that included treason, theft of state assets, and conspiracy with foreign powers to undermine national sovereignty. His trial revealed the full extent of the international network that had recruited him and the sophisticated methods they had used to identify and exploit vulnerabilities within African governments. During his testimony, Kaboré provided details that implicated mining executives, intelligence operatives, and financial institutions across 3 continents. The revelations sparked investigations in multiple countries and led to significant reforms in how international mining investments were regulated and monitored. Captain Ouedraogo's case was particularly complex because of his long service record and the genuine belief among some that he had acted from misguided patriotism rather than pure greed. Traoré's handling of his case demonstrated both justice and mercy, Ouedraogo received a substantial prison sentence but was also offered opportunities for rehabilitation and eventual reintegration into society. The international response to Traoré's successful counter-operation was mixed but ultimately served to strengthen his position both domestically and regionally. Western governments and international financial institutions initially expressed concern about the precedent set by Traoré's aggressive pursuit of international conspirators. There were warnings about the dangers of economic nationalism and the importance of maintaining stable investment climates for international businesses. But the evidence presented during the trials was so compelling, and the methods used by the conspirators so clearly illegal, that these criticisms failed to gain significant traction. More importantly, Traoré's careful documentation and transparent legal processes made it difficult for critics to dismiss his actions as arbitrary or politically motivated. African governments across the continent took notice of Traoré's success in identifying and defeating an international conspiracy targeting their sovereignty. Within months, several other countries had implemented similar security measures to protect their strategic assets and had begun sharing intelligence about potential economic warfare operations. The regional impact was transformative. What had been intended as an operation to isolate and weaken Burkina Faso instead became a catalyst for increased cooperation among African governments determined to protect their independence. But perhaps the most important outcome was the message that Traoré's victory sent to both international conspirators and African citizens. For international interests accustomed to manipulating African politics through economic pressure and local proxies, the failure of the gold theft operation demonstrated that the continent's new generation of leaders possessed both the intelligence and the determination to defend their sovereignty effectively. For African citizens who had grown cynical about their government's ability to resist foreign manipulation, Traoré's success provided hope that genuine independence was possible and that their leaders could protect their interests against even the most sophisticated international conspiracies. The stolen gold had been more than returned, it had been transformed from a symbol of vulnerability into a demonstration of strength. As the trials of the conspirators continued, and as the recovered gold was integrated back into Burkina Faso's financial system, Traoré faced the challenge of building on his victory to create lasting change. The successful defense against economic warfare had proven that resistance was possible, but sustainable sovereignty required more than just defeating individual conspiracies. It required building institutions and relationships that could withstand future attempts at manipulation and coercion. Working with allies across Africa and with international partners who respected African sovereignty, Traoré began implementing reforms designed to protect not just Burkina Faso but the entire region from similar attacks. These included new protocols for securing strategic assets, improved intelligence sharing among African governments, enhanced legal frameworks for prosecuting economic crimes, and most importantly, alternative financial relationships that reduced dependence on institutions that had historically been used to manipulate African economies. The gold that had disappeared in the darkness of a March night had returned not just as recovered wealth, but as the foundation for a new model of African independence that other leaders would study and adapt for generations to come. 1 year after the theft, as Traoré stood once again in the vault beneath the central bank of Burkina Faso, he reflected on how a criminal conspiracy had inadvertently strengthened his government and advanced the cause of African sovereignty more effectively than any policy initiative could have achieved. The gold bars gleamed under the fluorescent lights, but their true value lay not in their material worth but in what their recovery represented: proof that African governments could defend their interests, expose international conspiracies, and build the institutions necessary for genuine independence. The young military leader who had risen to power through strategic brilliance had been tested by forces that sought to destroy him and had emerged stronger than ever. But more importantly, he had shown that the age of easy manipulation of African governments by foreign interests was coming to an end. As he left the vault that day, Traoré carried with him the knowledge that while the gold was secure, the broader struggle for African sovereignty would continue to require vigilance, intelligence, and the courage to confront powerful interests that preferred a continent divided and dependent. The vanishing gold had taught its lessons, and those lessons would echo across Africa for generations to come. In the end, what had been intended as a theft had become a gift. The gift of proof that resistance was not only possible but could be victorious when guided by wisdom, supported by loyalty, and defended by those who understood that some things are worth any sacrifice to protect. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe to FictionWire Africa. This is a fictional story created purely for entertainment.